This is Phantom Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Elma Linz Kanefield. You're a psychotherapist, life coach, and founding director of the Juilliard School's counseling program. And I want to welcome you to the Phantom Electric Ghost podcast. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much.
And we've got your webpage up. It's below there. It's www.elmalinzkanefield.com/hamlets.mirror /mirror. That will be fully clickable for anybody that wants to click on that later. You won't have to remember that. And again, thank you for being on the podcast. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Really well, because my great granddaughters were just here.
Oh, great.
And that was a thrill.
It's always good to have family around. We always like to talk at the beginning of the podcast. We ask two questions of any guest. What motivates you and why do you do what you do?
What motivates me is I love my work. I love the people I work with. I love what they talk about, what I learn from them, and what initially motivated me to do what I do is that nobody did what I did, and I felt very helpless I work with performing artists.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody understood me. And I made it my life's mission to do my best to understand the psychology of the performing artist. And in doing that, I learned that Hamlet was right when he mused, "It is our artists, after all, who hold the mirror up to life, reflecting us all." Thus, the title of my book, Hamlet's Mirror, comes full circle.
That's real full circle, because I think, I'm a musician and I work with a lot of creative people, and a lot of people don't realize how much stage fright the artists go through, because once they get into the act, a lot of times they'll go away. But up to the moment that they're on that stage, there's a lot of fear. And I, even to this day, I've worked with people that suffer from that, and they really don't know how to address it, or they might address it in very bad ways. And so they don't actually go to a person like yourself to solve it. And it's interesting that you actually focused a career on that. And you were a performer yourself, right? You suffered that yourself.
May I ask what kind of musician?
I'm an electronic musician. I play keyboards. I develop sound design. I'm in my studio right now with all my synthesizers.
Wow.
So I use like Moogs. I use Rolands. I use modular synthesizers. I do a lot of subtractive synthesis on Dr. Robert Moog's Moogs.
And you collaborate with a lot of people.
Well, I work with people. I do a lot of. I've done a lot of podcasting in the last 5 years, but I have worked with people, and I've interviewed Grammy Award-winning producers in the past on the show. And so I do like to work with emerging and independent artists and bring their stories out. And I've collaborated with some artists and musicians as well, too. Again, when you discovered your own stage fright, how did you figure out how to transform that, or learn how to, handle that, and then want to help people, train people to be able to lessen that?
Well, the last 40 years, I've worked exclusively with performers. I moved from the Midwest I went to the neighborhood playhouse, oh my God, lifetimes ago. And then I was born in the Midwest, and I moved back when I was just devastated. When one night I opened my mouth to sing on the stage in New York, and nothing would come out.
Mm-hmm.
Went to doctors, no notes, and just psychiatrist, an adjustment reaction. I had to adjust. Didn't make sense. So I moved back to the Midwest, had a lovely family, but I always wanted to come back to New York. And I worked with a lot of performers in the Midwest. And I learned that stage fright's not a fear of the stage. It's a fear of what happens when you immerse yourself in music, in dance, in a character. And you really have to put yourself, your defenses, in a corner someplace till the performance is over. And you have to know yourself enough to regroup back to yourself after the performance. And unless you know yourself, who you are, what you want, what you need, basically, that sounds easy, those two things.
Mm-hmm.
Something in a script, in a phrase of music, in a ballet step, in the way you're held in a dance, is something going to trigger something old, which feels like stage fright, but it's really an unresolved issue.
So it's all the, maybe childhood trauma that maybe you haven't realized, or your
Yeah,
imposter syndrome
yeah,
suddenly
yeah,
gets triggered in the moment that you're supposed to perform,
yeah.
and then you're paralyzed.
Because you're, for an actor, inhabiting someone else.
Yeah.
And that you're doing your job. You should. I call it regression in the service of an art form.
Mm.
Appropriate.
Yeah, I think like a lot of times, like artists or musicians, even though they're not actors, they use a lot of theater. If you think about like a guy like David Bowie, he presented himself using a lot of theater traits, a lot of theater capabilities in terms of, and then a lot of other people in the industry started to do the same thing. You get the Freddie
He knew
Mercury.
himself.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. He knew, understood who he was,
yeah,
but
yeah.
he knew how to become the character. It was almost like a method actor. And a lot of times uh, that you have to be able to get back to yourself.
You
And he
must.
even, yeah, he talked about sometimes he had a hard time getting back to himself in some of
It's very hard. I think one of the hardest things that conservatories, drama schools, dance schools have to do is to help students after they perform, give them the space to say, okay, what was that like? Who are you now? Just transition back. It's so important because, take a role where you go out, where you've taken drugs in the role or hit somebody in a role, and you're not
Mhm.
quite out of the role. You go out, what do you do?
You hit somebody, you take drugs, you stay in character
Yeah.
because I think the industry, like you think about if you're a musician, and you get into that like frenetic pace,
Yeah. Oh
and
my
then
God.
they put you on tour, and it's like show after show after show. There's no time to be like the animal that like shakes it off. Like if
Yeah.
a deer is being chased by a wolf
Yeah.
and they get away, they shake it off. But
Yeah.
if you don't give a human being the ability to shake it off,
You know the song Shake It Off?
yeah.
That's what everybody should sing after a performance. Just shake it off, shake it off.
But it seems like even in all the forms of arts, there's not a lot of interest in giving the artist the time to shake it off.
That artists need it. Uh, They need it together as an ensemble, and they need it alone desperately. I mean, because it's hard to be somebody else
Hmm.
authentically.
Yeah, I mean,
Play, play a
it's
piece of
difficult.
music that's so engaging to your soul, to your heart. I don't mean soul religiously, I mean
Mhm.
to your being. You know,
Yeah, it's a hard thing. I mean, it's part of like when you get into the music, you kind of go into a zone, you go
yeah,
into a trance. And a lot of times, once you're in that, you can't even remember what you were doing.
the
Like, if I,
flow.
you're in that flow state, you're on stage, and if you really get into it, a lot of times some artists were able to kind of get away from being the impact of the stage, making them nervous because they get so into the music they don't even see the audience. They see the like little dots of the people there, but they're into the actual performance.
And,
And the performance itself kind of drives it.
and it's so, I mean, you know, Dickens says the best of times, the worst of times. It's the best of the careers, or if that's what you want to call it, and the worst of it. I
Mhm.
mean, you kind of lose your mind.
Yeah, it's a little bit, you don't you try to go back and look at your performance, you can like, I didn't even know I was doing that. I
I
didn't
know.
know that I was actually did those gestures or because it's just kind of like I feel that a lot of musicians like we can channel. It's like we can feel the muse and we can pick it up. And it's not that we don't have our own internal subconscious that we're exercising through our hands and our fingers and our voice, which we
And,
are. But it's
and
all
your
the things we
muscle
can do.
memory.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a muscle memory of the 10,000 hours on the bass guitar or the 10,000 hours on the piano or the 10,000 hours with vocal training. It's like once you have that, then you can just go with it. And it's like what you feel in the room, what you
Oh,
feel the energy of the crowd, what you felt like what you saw or read that day, or somebody told you something, or a dream or a waking dream. It's like all of it.
there's nothing like it, is there?
Yeah, it was just it's hard to describe to people who don't have that, but I think a lot of people can relate because even in your job, you have to give that presentation, you have to talk, you have to do something.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people
You have
are,
to end.
yeah, you have to end it, but you have to, there's a lot of creativity in being a human being. And it's not all reserved for artists.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people think they can't even be at that level, but in their normal day-to-day life, they do things that at somewhat levels,
That's
some
why
level.
Hamlet's mirror is for everyone.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Um, uh, uh, it, everyone can learn how to be creative, curious, collaborative, all those um, the weave, the fabric.
The concept of performance potential, which you trademarked, can you kind of speak to that and
Yeah,
talk about how people can really realize that full potential in
yes,
terms of performance potential?
I'd love to. I'll do it as an artist and as um, a lawyer. Let's say
Mhm.
there's a lot of lawyer stuff going around today. Um, let's say you're a pianist and you're given a Chopin etude to play. first time out of the box. You'll play a phrase, probably sight reading, knowing what you know from your training at the time of doing it. Performance is really doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you use everything you know the first time you play that passage, you're fulfilling the best that you can be, doing the best that you can do, knowing what you know the first time you play that passage. But what happens the 10th time?
Where you start to probably riff on it, you probably start to put more of yourself into it.
Expression, different fingering, different thoughts, different forms of creativity, your own voice, absolutely. So your performance potential is so much different. Now, a lawyer. First time a lawyer is in the courtroom defending someone. Been through law school, talked to his client, has studied, a little nervous, wants to do well. Okay. He's done everything to prepare for the very first time he defends his client. He has lived up to his performance potential. Client goes to jail, but he still has lived up. The 25th time, what happens?
Was all that experience is building up his
Yeah.
repertoire.
So performance potential is based on knowing what you know at the moment of performance. That's why staying in the moment is one of the most important thing for everybody.
Yeah, that's a hard thing because some folks, they want to do note for note. Like I tend to like experimental or expressionistic or fusion music, which tends to be able to go beyond what the original score was. Like you can actually explore the song and evolve it.
As long as you're in the moment, who cares?
Yeah, and
But
it's not, you're not going against the grain to actually evolve the song.
if you're thinking, oh, what will they think?
Yeah, you can't think
Uh,
about that.
I can't make the mistake I made last time. You're not in the moment. You're
There's no bad
worrying.
note. If you're
Yeah,
in the mindset that there's no bad note, there's only an opportunity,
yeah,
right? That you like Herbie Hancock and Miles Davis talk about this a lot. Like there were conversations
yeah,
that they had where Herbie he hit the wrong chord, perceived wrong chord, and Miles actually Davis reacted off of that chord and changed the song
yeah.
and didn't
Because
have to
you
restart
stayed
it.
in the moment.
Yeah, totally in the moment.
Yeah. I call that process thinking or outcome thinking. If you're outcome thinking, you're worried about the past. If you're outcome thinking, you're worried about the future.
Hmm.
If you're in the moment, you just stay with the art form. Stay
Yeah.
steady. If I was thinking, oh, how's this going? How's this going? I couldn't talk.
Yeah, you're not gonna stutter, you're gonna stop, you're gonna start and stop. It's like, when if I'm in a session with people and they keep on starting and stopping, it's like you got a bad vibe, right?
Yeah,
Like when you're in a session and you don't have to keep on starting and stopping, people asking which key, what are the chords, what's the timing. If you're with people that like there's a lot of nonverbal communication and you just nod at them and look at them, and they kind of just know where to go. Versus
Yeah.
if I'm in where the guy keeps on asking me what key I'm in, or what's the rhythm, or what's the chord that I'm using, like you can't hear it. Like you're a musician, you've been doing this for how long? You know what the chord is.
Yeah.
You know if it's a diminished seventh or a diminished fifth, you know what it is, but you're asking me, why are you asking me?
You'll make mistakes, but if you have to be perfect, that's outcome thinking.
Yeah.
Be perfect. But if you strive for excellence, you'll make mistakes. But who doesn't?
Well, mistakes can be beautiful. Like I'm a big purveyor of the idea of the happy accident in
Oh,
recording.
I love that.
The happy accident is like in the 60s and the 70s in recording. You go into a session and something was, you wrote it on the bars to be X, but then you went and actually played it and you actually didn't hit X.
Right.
You hit something else. You hit Y and Z, right? Or you went back to A, right? And it's like, whoa, you know what? That's actually better than what we were going to do. And you have the courage to actually take what you did and go with that rather than keep on trying to do the same thing.
Or you learn something
Yeah.
and you think, oh, yes, this could go this way.
Yeah, it can go that way. You're not into the narrow lane. You're not into this, like, they can only be this way. That you're more expansive in your palette. Like, if you can be more expansive, then you can go a lot of directions. But
Anything's possible.
yeah, but if you're so into it, it's got to be bebop. It's got to be, it's got to be like in this pentatonic scale that you can't go out of it, right? Then you're going to be stuck. And if that's what you want to do, maybe you're not stuck. That's what you want to. That's the outcome you want.
Have you ever been stuck?
I've been in situations where, I was in a structure where they wanted it to be very, very narrow, and then I felt like I don't want to be in that. I'm more into people who want to explore, and I just felt like I know I'm in the wrong place because they keep on going back and doing take after take after take after take. I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I want to be with the guys who are more like willing to do it like third or fourth take, not on the 99th or 122nd take. Like that's not doesn't feel good. If it doesn't feel good, why am I doing it?
Yeah, fun.
Yeah. You just got to know if you're in the right room. Like if you're in the right room, then you get to feel the vibe, right? And it's kind of esoteric, but you kind of know when you walk in a room if you feel the vibe or not. And if you're honest with yourself, you know where you want to be. If you kind of get stuck, is it why I gotta do it to get that paycheck? It's like fine, then that's what you're doing it for. But if you want to do it for other reasons, then you go where your heart is.
Yeah. How much time do you spend making music and how much time do you spend doing this?
I pretty much write every day. Whether it goes out or not is another thing. But it's like very cathartic for me. I write because I love to play. And whether it gets used or not was not my concern. It's kind of like it's just what I like to do. So I have a bedroom studio and everything's in here. And I have access to all my music tools right like in front of me. I don't put it where I have to look for it or drive to it. It's right in my house. So I'm always at my studio. If I want to be, I can walk out the door and go somewhere else, but I have access to it. And so I spend a lot of time podcasting, and I do other things. I do I do software design. So I kind of have left and right brain going on. So I do stuff that's like software design. I do podcasting. I do music, and I try to have a balance with my family. I do have family life, but I tend to try to live kind of an artistic renaissance type of idea of like using left and right brain. in different measure based on whatever I feel like doing at the time.
Why not?
Well, it just makes you like life isn't always one way. So if you can be expansive, I try to live an expansive life. I lived in Tokyo for 2 years. I've traveled a little bit, but I like to put myself sometimes in a place that I didn't. When I went to Tokyo, I didn't live there. I didn't know how to speak Japanese. I ended up being there for 2 years, and I put myself in that environment because I was interested in it. And that some people couldn't feel comfortable doing that. But sometimes it's exciting to put yourself into a place that you're maybe going to tread
Uncomfortable.
water.
Uncomfortable and taking risks.
Yeah.
Yeah. I call that fearlessness. You're afraid, but you do it anyway. That's reaching your potential.
Yeah, that's the thing about potential. It's hard because like you'll put like a glass ceiling on yourself mentally, and then you have to kind of crash through it. And it's like you have to like kind of reinvent yourself every so often, because if I get bored. Like if I keep been doing something and it's boring, then I say, you know what? It might be hard and I might have to start all over again in some other way, but it feels better than be doing what I've been doing.
Yeah. When I get bored, I ask myself, what's not working? And I figure out what's not working, I do something else.
But there is some comfort sometimes in maybe just some people like the comfort of being able to phone it in and not have to work. They do a job and it's just like they just they're on muscle memory and they don't want to have to think about it. And I tend to put myself in situations where I might not be the best person in the room, but I'm coming with a different idea. I'm asking a question. It's out of left field, and it's kind of what they want because that's why I'm there.
And you know what? It's so much fun.
Yeah, it's you don't know what you don't know, and it's cool to find out new things, and not to just live in your comfort zone. And I think that's a hard thing in a world that people just want to be in the cube. They want to be in the box because they want to know. They want to have a known result. They
You
want.
know, you said something that um, so correlates with performance potential. You don't know what you don't know. So if you do something and you do it based on what you do know, and there's this much that you don't know, you still reach your potential because you cannot know what you don't know, but you can learn.
Hmm.
And that's a wonderful thing about making mistakes, not aiming for perfection, listening.
Yeah, listening's really core. I think a lot of people forget about that.
Well, we go to school, and two things we're not taught. We're not taught about feelings, we're taught to think, kind of, and we're not taught to listen. Really listen. We're taught to hear, but listening where we put our own thoughts on a shelf someplace and listen to what the other person is really saying or not.
Yeah, a lot of times, if you're listening to somebody, you're trying to come up with a response before they even finish what they're saying. So you didn't actually hear the full picture of what they're trying to say, because you're so concerned about either trying to win an argument or come up with a response that you didn't actually really process everything that was said. And if you let that, it's like in music where you have silences. Like a lot of times we have a lot of tools that can layer so much and it gets overwhelming. Like I have all these multi tracks and I can layer track after track on top of tracks. And sometimes it's better to pull those away and have like some silence and actually hear the notes on a single track before you try to put something on top of it and actually understand what was that first track before I layer 5, 10 tracks on top of it.
It's because you're listening. Yeah. And collaborate. Yeah.
That's a hard thing to get to because a lot of people want to be so perfect.
But
That
that's the danger.
yeah, there's so many tools today. They'll go use AI, they'll use Grammarly, they'll use all these tools to well, I can't, they don't want to have an original thought. I went through an AI course just to learn about ChatGPT and I got certified because I'm in IT. And I was looking at what they were doing, right? And they said, "Oh, I can use all these prompts to actually help write my business document." And I'm like, "Really?" So I looked at what they did, and they took 5 minutes to do something that might take a human being maybe 2, 3 hours to do. But I said, if you actually do the 2 to 3 hours of actually doing it yourself rather than having the prompts come back, you learn stuff. Then now you want to accelerate this to maybe not have to pay somebody for the 2 hours or not have to pay the body for the 2 hours. So you
But
get it
do it
in
yourself.
5 minutes. Yeah, but like what are you missing from that human action of actually doing the research yourself versus having the machine do it for you? And some of these AI technologists are really missing the boat. I think they're missing the boat on some of this stuff. And you're gonna keep on getting like the same answers. And then you're gonna get a level of non-innovation. That people are just gonna go with the first answer the AI gives them and not question or go into the details or have any originality.
Yeah.
And I'm like, is that really progress?
Animal Farm.
It's not real progress, but it's like it's just a shortcut to mediocrity.
It is. You must love your podcast.
Well, I like doing it. I like talking to people, but uh maybe you can give examples of performing artists that you've counseled and some stories that you can tell us about how that process for trying to get over the kind of fear that we've talked about.
Can you say that another way?
Well, I think you have some sample questions that I was reviewing where you've worked with some real life performing artists that you've counseled, and maybe talk about the experiences with some of these performing artists that you've maybe you can give some stories about like
Oh,
what you've done.
okay. Well, I'm very, very, very careful not to have anybody identified.
Yeah, I don't need their exact person, but maybe
I
just
know, I know. In Hamlet's mirror, I have, maybe 40 what I call tableau. And what I did was mix the people I work with into fictitious
real
stories.
examples to like cross them over so they're not the same person. Yeah.
Yeah, to reflect on the concepts in the book. One that comes to mind was, I forget who I called him, sorry. let's call him Neil for
Hmm.
just because I forget. His name is in the book isn't Neil. He was the most critical, judgmental person I almost ever work with. My clothes, my office, my this, my that. I mean, thank God I've learned not to take things personally. And I used to have a Bichon named Diva who came in the office with me. And I worked with Neil for years. And he was a gorgeous, gorgeous saxophone player. I mean, I knew who he was. Of course, he wasn't a saxophone player, but let's say he was a saxophone player. And he came in just because he wasn't happy. But he'd criticize and criticize and criticize. And he couldn't really get inside himself.
Mm.
And one day, Diva wasn't in the office. And he said, "Where's that mangy mutt of yours?" And I guess my face told the story. That mangy mutt of mine had died. And he started crying.
Oh, he cried. Wow.
And I started crying, which was so unprofessional of me, I couldn't believe it. So we sat there crying together. And from that moment on, he opened up and started telling me how his teacher had criticized him, his parents, who I couldn't get at for the life of me, had torn him down, torn him down, torn him down. And the only positive he had had in his life, he was a jazz player in this fictitious thing, were the reviews that he had gotten. And by the time he finished his therapy, he was the most complimentary person. No kidding.
So he got beyond it. So he finally got beyond that block. I guess he was like stuck in the hypercriticism.
He was so afraid to be giving, and all the sadness had to come out. And I've never cried in a session, but
That's what broke through. It's weird.
the moral of that story is for me to cry in more sessions.
You never know how a human being is built. Like you could assume that certain things will work with certain people, but it was that moment that caught through into his humanity, and then got him to kind of break that wall down. From what you're saying, he cried, which is not. It seems like it's something he probably doesn't do until that moment.
You know, vulnerability. I work with artists is the greatest. I don't want to say attribute, but ability.
Mm-hmm.
I think that any artist can have And what's the greatest gift that anybody can have? Being vulnerable, trusting self, trusting others. And that's what I hope comes through in Hamlet's Mirror.
I'm a big believer in the authenticity of vulnerability, because you have people who feel like things have got to be 100% perfect on target, and I'm kind of like, I like to listen to a guy like Neil Young, and
Oh,
when you listen to,
oh,
I love the kind of his wavering voice. Like sometimes, like he could have a perfect voice when he's with Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. He can hit it perfect, right? He can do the perfect harmonies. But sometimes when he's with his own group, like Crazy Horse, he would go and do things that were very vulnerable, like Tonight's the Night album.
yeah.
Super vulnerable. They was like, just like a raw nerve. He would put it out and it wasn't exactly perfect, but it was perfect for the moment of
Him
the song
and him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some people are not willing to be that vulnerable anymore. The
Or
singer
able.
songwriters in the 70s, they were willing to do that. And a
Well,
lot of
that's what let's go back to stage fright. When you're in your art form, you're vulnerable. And you're vulnerable to be flooded, maybe with, I call them unresolved uh, issues. I
Mhm.
hate that word. But, and if something snaps, that's why people think, oh, I have stage fright. They don't. They have these things floating around them that they need to understand, self reflect in
Mhm.
themselves and heal.
Like unpack all that,
Yeah.
because like a lot, if you don't, then it just builds up to the
Yeah.
point where you have that
They
moment
bubble up.
and then you can't perform, because like if you it can suddenly come up on you, and it's like it's just built up, and then
Yeah.
like
A piece of music, my God, can do that. Or a line in a play can resurrect such a memory that it can make you freeze on stage.
mm. So that's where like a self-examination and introspection that kind of lead to the vulnerability and the
You got
authenticity.
to do your self work if you really want to perform. But this is true in life anyway. If
Yeah,
you want to be a good mother, if you want to be a good
manager.
chef, if you want to be a good podcaster, you've got to know yourself. And this is what Hamlet's Mirror is about.
So when you started to do this work, what was the reception um, from the
Oh,
people who have read your work and worked with you? What was the initial reception, and then what is it today?
well, I moved to New York when I was 40 to work with performers, and I thought, oh my God. People said, you're nuts, Elma. I had a big practice in the Midwest. I ended it, and I thought, everybody must have a practice exclusive to performers. You know what?
It didn't.
Nobody. So immediately I was very lucky. I've been very successful because nobody did it.
Why do you
And
think they didn't do it? Why do you think nobody had thought to do that?
You know what? I have no idea. Because it's hard to be a performer.
Hmm,
I have no idea.
that's
I
interesting.
know other therapists treat performers, but that's all I see. A friend of mine from the Midwest wanted me to treat Daryl Strawberry.
Wow.
And I said no, because he doesn't recreate somebody's work.
Mm-hmm. He's more like
He
athletes.
was really mad at me.
Yeah, the athlete, it's different. I mean, they're a type of performer, but it's not the same as an artistic,
Right.
theater or like artist or painter or somebody's doing that type of work.
Yeah.
It's a different type of capability because it's a different performance aspect. You're trying to hit those numbers to win a game, hit those like plays to
I
hit.
didn't know how.
Yeah, it's a totally different thing.
And I don't know if I would know how to work with a visual artist,
Mm.
because they're so creative and everything, but they leave their work.
Oh yeah. So like a performing artist that actually like a singer or an art like an actor, they're enveloped in their work.
I mean, and they repeat the same work over and over again. I mean,
Yeah.
in the book, I talk about mourning, how each moment has to be mourned because it's gone. A visual
Mhm.
artist has his or her or their work on the wall or on something.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like moment by moment. Like that's why you try to capture it on tape, but like you can't recreate it. That's why a lot of times I'm a big purveyor of like putting everything down. Like even if you're in practice and
You
you turn
can't
on
recreate
yeah, you
exactly that moment.
yeah, you turn the tape on because somebody said, well, this is just a rehearsal. But there are a lot of rehearsals that become the song, because in that moment you can't, even though you're a
Gone,
professional musician,
gone,
you can't get back to it because
yeah.
it's so much feeling and it's so point in time
And
that
it's so
yeah,
subtle,
yeah,
subtly different. Oh,
yeah,
I
it's all different.
love to see um, performances again, the same performances, because they're not the same performances.
Yeah, they're not. I mean, the only way you can do that, like with the machines today, you do have machines that can take the master tape and just run it the way you wrote it. And then if you use that, then you're not really playing. You're kind of lip syncing or singing over something. And maybe your vocal will be unique, but the rest of the music is exactly the way you wrote it. Uh, and I'm kind of not really into that because I think it takes away from the audience. Because if you have a real live band, then you're going to play that song different every night. But if you've got all these machines just playing exactly what you wrote, then you lose all that emotion. You lose the reason why I would want to see you live is I don't need to hear it the way you cut the song on the single. I
That's
need
right.
to hear that you interpret it for that. I don't need you to just can go listen to the CD. If I want to hear that, I would just go listen to the CD.
But
Why do I need to watch it?
when you listen, don't you hear something different?
Yeah, it's how you interpret it at that moment. Like a
Yeah.
human being, when you listen, you might recall a different mind picture based on the way you feel. So you actually is the same music, but you might feel at this moment it recalls a different like sound painting. I
Yeah.
always talk about sound paintings. Because I think
Sound what?
sound paintings.
Wow.
The idea, like, it came from like George Martin and the Beatles. There was a documentary where George Martin was talking about the way they recorded the Beatles and how you can think of it like Monet, where you can use the studio as a canvas and you can paint with all the tracks, all the tools. You can build these layers that you can't do live. You can use the tools to actually do things like the way Sergeant Pepper's came out. And because you can do it that way, you can actually evolve the form to be more. It's kind of what the Beatles were famous for, is creating the album format that people would not just listen to a single, but listen to the whole thing as Sergeant Pepper's all the way through, as like a happening, as a thing, as a concept, because that's not the way people usually listen to music. It was like one song at
Right.
a time, but to actually look at as like a sound film or a sound painting. And it's when he went on to get bands like Pink Floyd and progressive bands like Yes, and they started to actually take that idea, and we got the age of the album, because you can take
Beautiful.
something beyond.
Do you sleep?
Yeah, I sleep. I just know a lot of, unless I'm big in, I kind of a music history nut. I thought I like to dive into like why things are the way they are and how they got to be the way they are, and understand, this forms how they got to be, known or understood. Just, and then talk to people about things.
You're en- you're encyclopedic.
Yeah, it's probably my it's just a part affectation I have. Yeah, I
No,
want to.
uh, I'm learning a lot from you.
Well, I think it's interesting to kind of look at the world, and it's kind of like that scientific mindset or the artistic mindset, is to, like, you get into something and you want to be, in that form. Why an actor wants to be an actor, why a painter wants to be a painter, is like they usually looked at something, they saw something, or they heard something, or they saw somebody do something. Like I saw Orson Welles' Citizen Kane. I'm like, wow, what kind of film is this? And then I watched a documentary, and Orson Welles, the people were talking about, like, they asked him, like, how did you get these camera angles? How did you do that? I said, I didn't know what I couldn't do. The people were asking, like, why did you have these
That's
shots?
performance potential.
Yeah. He's like, he didn't realize that you couldn't do it that way, so he did
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
In any art form, I've always been very interested in people kind of pushing it at the bleeding edge.
In
You know,
in Hamlet's Mirror, I write about how the art form impacts and affects the artist, how the artist and the artist's performance potential develops. Because I think a singer is different than a dancer,
mhm.
the person. An actor is different um, uh, than a musician. And that's because of the art form. I mean, a musician starts very, very young. A singer can't because of the chords.
Yeah, that's true.
Um, that was very interesting learning for me in my practice. They're really very, very different uh, kinds of people.
Is it interesting how people came to their art form?
And
Like,
that's right. I
yeah,
write about that too. How people and may I talk about that a little?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Many artists come to their art form, I found, because of loss.
Mm-hmm.
It fills a void. And the biggest loss that I found overall, and I've worked with hundreds, I mean, I've been at this for over 40 decades. 4 decades. Is the loss of empathy
Mm.
when they were small. That the art form, whatever it is, filled this empathic, I know you, I get you, I understand you, I feel you, I hold you void.
That's interesting. 'Cause like in sociology, there's a term like anomie. That a lot of people suffer from anomie, and they kind of feel like they're rejected from society. And I feel like a lot of artists, they spend a lot of time in solitary form. Like every time I talk to a writer, or musician, they might be on stage, but there's a lot of time the artists are like by themselves, and they can fill that void with their art, where other people, they can't be by themselves like that. They have to be in the crowd, they have to be around other people, but the artist sometimes can be kind of in this zone of creation that sometimes doesn't have a lot of other people
Yeah.
around,
Yeah.
because they get the comfort in the form of the art that they're in.
Yeah, I mean, look at a classical dancer. Might start when they are 3 years old. And I mean, really absorb it, embrace it, feel it so profoundly. And a classical musician will be in a practice room, God knows how many hours.
Yeah, it's just because they can be in that zone,
Yeah.
away from the rest of the inputs of the world,
And
and the
feel
validate.
that,
Yeah,
feel that I get you.
the validation you're talking about. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's really powerful. But it's interesting upon the kind of the amount of loneliness there is in the arts. that and the people have to kind of solve that, because that can hurt you too. Because if you spend too much time and you don't learn social skills, we're in humanity.
Oh, they're yings and yangs too.
Yeah, yeah. There's always like you pay the cost, you pay the price somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's true. That's what people can learn. Oh, I'm like that. I like to be alone, but I really have trouble maintaining eye contact or talking to people. I just don't know what to say because I found that musicians, you know what they like to talk about? Music.
Yeah, it's like, what's the rest of the world about? Yeah, like they're so into the form that if you try to have like a typical conversation with somebody on the subway, it's like, they're talking about, some deep passage in the favorite
Oh my
scene
God.
that they're in too. And they're like, well, what about the weather? What about the Red Sox? It's like, well, I don't know what's going on
The
with
Red Sox?
that. It's like, what's going on with the Red Sox? Why do I even pay attention to that? But it's been a great conversation. It always goes by quicker than I ever imagined. That we are getting closer to the hour, but I hadn't talked about your website. And before we close, we always talk about the link that you provided. So is that where everybody can find Hamlet's Mirror, or they can find out other information about you?
You could find out information about me on my website. You can find Hamlet's Mirror on my website, and Amazon is big on selling
That's great.
uh,
So we
Hamlet's.
we do encourage people to click that link because it will be clickable everywhere that we're published on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. That will be clickable immediately. We've been live on those three channels. We will be on all the major podcast channels by tomorrow, like Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, a lot of them by that time, and that will be clickable there. So you'll be able to click right through and actually check out Hamlet's Mirror, where you can actually purchase it. And I do encourage people to go through and check that out and actually do a deeper dive on the book itself, because we've been alluding to it in the episode. But I want to thank you again for being a guest on the Family Electric Ghost podcast.
Well, when I can't, has it been an hour?
Yeah, we just hit it.
It's amazing. Thank you. It flew.
Yeah, I've tried to make the hour format kind of go seamlessly as much as I can. And this has been episode 1109. We've been on the air since 2016. And is this something we've figured out how to do? But again, thank you for being on the show. You've had a lot of wisdom here and a lot of like points that I hadn't really dived into lately or even at all. And I appreciate the time you spent with us on the show.
Well, thank you, Kevin. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too.